The cruelest choices are not the ones that break your heart today, but the ones that make you wonder years later who you might have become if someone had simply believed in you. The silver bells of Moon Haven Palace echoed across the valley as wolves from every allied territory gathered beneath banners embroidered with the royal crest. It was the night of choosing, the ceremony every unmated Omega dreamed about since childhood, when the Alpha King would name the woman destined to stand beside him as Luna. Candles flickered beneath towering marble columns while music drifted gently through the grand hall, wrapping every hopeful face in golden light. Evelyn Carter stood near the back of the gathering, almost hidden behind rows of elegantly dressed noble families. Her pale blue gown was simple compared to the glittering gowns surrounding her, carefully mended at the sleeves after years of careful use. She knew she did not belong among the daughters of powerful bloodlines, yet she had accepted the invitation because declining a royal summons was impossible. Around her, whispers floated through the crowd like cold winter wind. Some admired the beauty of the noble alpha women waiting confidently near the throne. Others quietly dismissed the unknown Omega standing alone in the shadows. Evelyn had grown accustomed to such conversations long ago. They no longer wounded her the way they once had, although they still reminded her how invisible she seemed inside a world that measured worth through lineage and power. High above the hall, enormous windows revealed the rising full moon, bathing polished marble floors in soft silver light. Then the great doors slowly opened. Every voice disappeared. Alpha King Sebastian Hawthorne entered the hall wearing a midnight blue ceremonial coat trimmed with silver embroidery that reflected the moonlight like flowing water. He carried himself with calm authority rather than pride, greeting elders with respectful nods before approaching the ancient stone platform where generations of Alpha Kings had chosen their Luna. Evelyn lifted her eyes only once. For a single heartbeat, Sebastian's silver gaze drifted across the crowd and seemed to pause where she stood. Her breath caught unexpectedly, not because she believed impossible dreams might come true, but because kindness had always flickered within his eyes whenever their paths briefly crossed during previous royal gatherings. She quickly looked away, reminding herself that hope often became the first step toward disappointment. The royal elder stepped forward and raised an ancient staff carved with symbols of the moon goddess. Silence settled across the hall once again. By the blessing of the moon goddess and the laws of the Northern Kingdom, Alpha King Sebastian Hawthorne will now choose the woman who shall stand beside him. Every heart seemed to stop beating. Sebastian slowly descended from the platform, passing rows of noble daughters who smiled with growing anticipation. His footsteps echoed across the marble floor until he stopped before Lady Victoria Ashford, the daughter of one of the kingdom's oldest alpha families. With quiet dignity, he extended his hand toward her. Gasps swept through the gathering before respectful applause quickly followed. Victoria accepted his hand with graceful confidence as members of both families smiled in celebration. Evelyn remained perfectly still. She did not cry. She did not protest. She simply lowered her eyes and felt something inside her quietly let go. The dream she had never dared to speak aloud disappeared as silently as morning mist beneath sunlight. While the hall filled with music and congratulations, she slipped unnoticed toward a side entrance, the soft rain outside already beginning to fall beneath the moonlit sky. No one called her name. No one asked where she was going. Beyond the palace gates, Evelyn paused only once to look back at the glowing towers before pulling her worn cloak around her shoulders. Then, without anger, without bitterness, and without a single promise of returning, the forgotten Omega walked into the darkness, unaware that the choice made inside the palace that night would change not only her own destiny, but the future of an entire kingdom. Evelyn Carter walked until the lights of Moon Haven Palace disappeared behind sheets of gentle rain, leaving only the distant glow of the full moon to guide her through the winding mountain road. The celebration continued somewhere beyond the hills, filled with music, laughter, and congratulations for the kingdom's future Luna, yet each passing mile made those sounds feel more like memories from someone else's life. She never looked back again. There was nothing left for her behind those palace walls except a version of herself that had spent too many years waiting to be noticed. Dawn arrived with pale golden light stretching across endless valleys as Evelyn reached a small crossroads where weathered wooden signs pointed toward villages she had never visited. She carried little more than a worn leather satchel, a few silver coins, and the quiet determination growing stronger inside her with every step. For the first time in many years, no one expected anything from her. The thought was frightening, but strangely freeing. Days turned into weeks as Evelyn traveled farther west than she had ever imagined possible. She helped farmers gather harvests before early storms arrived, repaired clothing for families who could not afford new fabric, and cared for tired travelers whenever someone became ill along lonely roads. She accepted food instead of money whenever she could, believing kindness should never become another debt for people already struggling. Everywhere she stopped, strangers remembered her gentle smile long after she continued her journey. Back in the Northern Kingdom, life appeared to move forward exactly as everyone expected. Lady Victoria Ashford quickly adapted to royal life beside Alpha King Sebastian Hawthorne, while advisors praised the wisdom of strengthening ancient alliances through noble marriage. Yet despite the celebrations, Sebastian occasionally found himself looking toward the palace entrance during evening gatherings, almost expecting to see a quiet Omega standing near the back of the room, wearing a simple pale blue dress. He dismissed the thought each time. Evelyn had likely returned to her village, where life would continue peacefully. At least that was what he chose to believe. Several months later, an elderly palace steward approached him with unusual hesitation. "Your Majesty," the man said softly, "there is something you should know." Sebastian lowered the document he had been reading. The steward continued, "Miss Evelyn Carter never returned home after the choosing ceremony. Her neighbors have not seen her. Travelers have not crossed paths with her. No one knows where she went." A strange silence settled over the room. Sebastian stared through the palace window toward the distant western mountains, remembering the brief moment their eyes had met before the ceremony began. He had assumed she would simply continue living the quiet life she always had. The possibility that she had vanished without a single farewell had never crossed his mind. "Send riders," he finally ordered. "Search every neighboring territory." The royal guards departed within hours, following old trade routes, mountain passes, and rivers stretching far beyond the kingdom's borders. Weeks became months, and every report returned with the same answer.
No trace.
Some believed she had started a peaceful new life under another name. Others whispered that she had wandered too far into unknown lands. Eventually, the kingdom stopped asking questions. Only Sebastian found himself pausing whenever autumn rain touched the palace windows, quietly wondering why the memory of one forgotten Omega refused to disappear, even after the rest of the world had already accepted that she was gone. 5 years quietly reshaped the world in ways no one inside the Northern Kingdom could have imagined. The forgotten Omega, who had walked away beneath a rain-filled sky, no longer measured her future by the life she had left behind. Evelyn Carter now stood atop a sunlit hillside overlooking a thriving valley where dozens of stone buildings, flourishing orchards, and busy workshops stretched beside a wide river that had once flowed through abandoned land. Travelers called the growing settlement Silver Dawn because every morning the first rays of sunlight turned its rooftops into shimmering bands of silver. To Evelyn, it was simply home. She had not built it through titles or inherited wealth. She built it one act of kindness at a time. Farmers who had lost their harvests found fertile fields to cultivate together. Skilled craftsmen who had been ignored because of their rank discovered opportunities to teach apprentices eager to learn. Omegas, betas, and alphas worked beside one another without being judged by bloodline or status. Every family contributed according to their abilities, and every child received an education regardless of the name they carried. Visitors often asked who had created such an unusual place. The answer always surprised them: a quiet woman who believed that respect should never depend upon power. Evelyn walked through the bustling marketplace greeting merchants by name, stopping to help an elderly baker arrange fresh loaves before kneeling to compliment a little girl proudly displaying the first wooden bird she had carved herself. Nothing about her manner suggested she ruled the settlement. She preferred listening before speaking, encouraging before commanding, and serving before asking others to follow. Yet everyone instinctively looked toward her whenever difficult decisions needed to be made. Leadership had found her because she had never chased it. Late that afternoon, a weathered trader arrived with wagons carrying fine cloth from eastern territories. After completing his business, he hesitated before offering Evelyn a carefully folded newspaper printed by royal scribes from the northern kingdom. She thanked him politely and unfolded the pages with calm curiosity. News from her former home rarely reached Silver Dawn, and even when it did, she seldom searched for familiar names. This time her eyes paused upon a detailed sketch of Alpha King Sebastian Hawthorne standing beside Lady Victoria during another royal ceremony. The accompanying article praised the prosperity of the kingdom and the strength of its alliances. Evelyn studied the image only for a moment before folding the paper again. There was no bitterness inside her heart, only quiet gratitude for the unexpected path life had chosen instead. Had everything unfolded differently years ago, Silver Dawn would never have existed. As evening settled across the valley, children laughed beside the river while lanterns illuminated peaceful streets filled with conversation and music. Evelyn stood upon a wooden bridge, watching the reflections shimmer across calm water. One of her closest advisors approached with a warm smile. "Another caravan requested permission to settle here," he said. "They heard this is the place where people are valued before they are judged." Evelyn looked across the growing town, her eyes filled with quiet hope rather than pride. "Then let us make certain they find exactly that," she replied softly. Far away beyond the western mountains, the forgotten Omega had unknowingly begun creating something far greater than a refuge. She was building a future that would one day change the destiny of the very kingdom she had quietly left behind. Autumn arrived early in the northern kingdom, bringing with it an unexpected hardship. Weeks of relentless rain had ruined wheat fields across several provinces, and merchant caravans returned with emptier wagons than anyone could remember. Markets that had once overflowed with grain now displayed carefully measured portions, while anxious families quietly stretched every loaf of bread a little farther. Inside Moon Haven Palace, Alpha King Sebastian Hawthorne listened as his advisors studied maps spread across the council table. Every neighboring territory faced the same shortages. Trade routes had slowed, harvests had failed, and the kingdom needed reliable partners before winter settled across the mountains. An elderly trade minister carefully unfolded a ledger filled with recent reports. "There is one place that continues sending full shipments," he explained. "Every caravan praises the same settlement. They call it Silver Dawn." Sebastian frowned slightly. The name had appeared repeatedly during the past several months, always connected to stories of fair prices, generous harvests, and peaceful cooperation among every rank of wolf. "Who governs the settlement?" he asked. The minister slowly shook his head. "That is the strange part, Your Majesty. No noble house claims it. No royal family supports it. Yet merchants describe remarkable organization, honest leadership, and prosperity unlike anywhere else in the Western Territories." Curious. Silence settled across the chamber. Sebastian reached for the newest trade agreement stamped with an unfamiliar silver seal shaped like the rising sun above distant mountains. Beneath it appeared a single signature written with elegant confidence. Evelyn Carter. His hand froze. For a long moment, he simply stared at the familiar name, convinced memory must be playing an impossible trick upon him. 5 years had passed without a single trace. Countless searches had ended in silence. Yet now her name rested before him upon the most respected trade document in the Western lands. None of the advisors noticed the change in his expression. They continued discussing shipping routes, warehouse capacity, and winter supplies while Sebastian's thoughts drifted toward a quiet Omega who had once slipped unnoticed through the palace gates beneath falling rain. Could it truly be the same Evelyn? Had she somehow survived alone for all these years? The questions refused to leave him. Before the council meeting ended, Sebastian made his decision. "Prepare a diplomatic delegation," he said calmly. "I will travel to Silver Dawn myself." Several advisors exchanged surprised glances. "Your Majesty," one carefully replied, Such negotiations can easily be handled by ministers. Sebastian gently closed the trade ledger. Some partnerships deserve personal respect. Far beyond the western mountains, Evelyn welcomed another caravan arriving at Silver Dawn with wagons carrying families searching for a safer future. She greeted every newcomer personally, introducing children to teachers, craftsmen to workshops, and farmers to fertile fields ready for planting in the coming spring. As the sun lowered behind the hills, she paused beside the entrance bridge, where the silver banner of her growing settlement fluttered peacefully above the river. She smiled with quiet satisfaction, unaware that somewhere far to the east, the man who had once unknowingly changed the course of her life had finally begun following the path that would lead him back to her, not as the forgotten Omega he had last seen, but as the respected founder of a place the entire kingdom had quietly learned to admire. The journey to Silver Dawn took 7 days, carrying Alpha King Sebastian Hawthorne farther west than he had ever traveled before. The farther his delegation rode from the northern kingdom, the more unexpected stories greeted them. Every roadside innkeeper praised the same remarkable settlement where hungry families always found honest work instead of charity, where merchants were welcomed with fairness instead of impossible taxes, and where children from every background studied together beneath the same roof. Sebastian listened quietly, saying little, while each conversation added another piece to a picture he struggled to understand. None of the descriptions resembled the fragile Omega he remembered standing alone beneath the palace chandeliers 5 years earlier. By the afternoon of the 7th day, the road curved around a hillside overlooking a broad valley alive with activity. Stone bridges crossed a sparkling river, while fields of golden grain stretched toward neat rows of workshops, schools, orchards, and homes built with thoughtful precision. Workers laughed together as wagons moved freely through clean streets lined with flowering trees. No guards shouted orders. No nobles demanded special treatment. Yet everything operated with calm efficiency. Captain Rowan Ellis, who rode beside the king, surveyed the valley with open admiration. "This place feels different," he admitted. "People work because they believe in what they are building." Sebastian said nothing. His attention rested upon the silver banner rising above the central hall, the same symbol stamped upon the trade agreements that had reached his council months before. As the delegation entered the settlement, townspeople greeted them with polite curiosity rather than fear. Children waved. Shopkeepers smiled. Travelers continued their conversations without panic at the arrival of royal riders. It was confidence born not from arrogance, but from security. A young administrator welcomed the delegation with professional warmth before leading them toward the council hall. "Our founder will receive you shortly," she explained. "Thank you for honoring our invitation." Sebastian stepped inside a spacious meeting room filled with sunlight pouring through tall windows overlooking the valley. Shelves of maps, agricultural plans, and trade records lined the walls beside paintings created by local artists. Everything reflected purpose, without unnecessary luxury. He waited beside the conference table while quiet footsteps approached from the hallway. The wooden doors opened slowly. A woman entered wearing an elegant navy blue traveling coat fastened with a simple silver clasp shaped like the rising sun. Her posture carried quiet confidence, and every movement reflected years of steady leadership rather than inherited privilege. Soft golden hair rested neatly over one shoulder, and calm blue eyes surveyed the room before settling upon the visitors. Time itself seemed to pause. Sebastian recognized her immediately despite the years that had passed. Evelyn Carter looked directly at him with composed grace. There was no anger in her expression, no bitterness, and no trace of the uncertain young Omega who had once slipped unnoticed through the palace gates. She inclined her head politely. "Welcome to Silver Dawn, Your Majesty. I hope your journey was comfortable." Her voice remained warm, measured, and entirely professional. Sebastian found himself unable to answer for a brief moment. The kingdom had sent him to negotiate with the founder of an extraordinary settlement. Instead, destiny had quietly seated him across the table from the woman he had believed lost forever, and for the first time in many years, he realized that the greatest surprise waiting at the end of his journey had never been the empire she had built. It was the person she had become without him. The formal meeting lasted for nearly 2 hours, yet not once did Evelyn Carter allow old memories to influence a single decision. Maps covered the polished oak table as she calmly discussed grain production, transportation routes, irrigation systems, and fair trade agreements with the same confidence seasoned rulers displayed after decades of leadership. Sebastian Hawthorne listened far more than he spoke. Every proposal she presented reflected careful planning, practical wisdom, and genuine concern for ordinary families rather than political advantage. When the negotiations concluded, Evelyn invited the royal delegation to tour Silver Dawn before any agreement was signed. "Numbers explain trade," she said with a gentle smile. "People explain whether those numbers truly matter." Sebastian accepted immediately. Their first stop was a spacious school where children of every rank studied together around long wooden tables filled with books, maps, and handmade models. No student sat apart because of family name or social standing. An elderly teacher greeted Evelyn with warm affection, introducing her not as their ruler, but simply as the woman who had insisted every child deserved the chance to learn. Sebastian quietly watched as several students surrounded Evelyn, proudly showing her letters they had learned to write and small inventions they hoped would improve the coming harvest. She remembered every child's name. She celebrated every small achievement as though it were the greatest victory in the world. The tour continued through workshops where experienced craftsmen patiently trained young apprentices, then onward to orchards where widows and retired laborers managed flourishing gardens that supplied food for the settlement throughout every season. No one appeared frightened of authority. They greeted Evelyn with genuine gratitude instead of rehearsed obedience. One elderly farmer gently clasped her hands before thanking her for giving his family a second chance after drought had destroyed everything they once owned. Evelyn smiled quietly and answered with the same words she had spoken countless times before. "People are never the worst thing that ever happened to them." Those simple words settled heavily inside Sebastian's heart. He remembered the frightened Omega standing alone at the back of the royal hall years earlier. She had possessed the same quiet compassion then, yet he had never truly stopped long enough to understand its depth. As the afternoon sunlight softened across the valley, Captain Rowan Ellis walked beside the king in thoughtful silence before finally speaking. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "our kingdom has stronger armies and older castles, but I have never seen people trust their leader the way these families trust Miss Carter." Sebastian looked across the bustling streets where children laughed beside market stalls while merchants, farmers, alphas, betas, and omegas worked shoulder to shoulder without visible division. He realized Silver Dawn had achieved something the Northern Kingdom had never fully accomplished. It had created belonging instead of merely maintaining order. That evening, as golden light faded beyond the western hills, Sebastian stood alone on the balcony of the guest residence overlooking the peaceful settlement. Every lantern glowing below represented a family whose future had been shaped by the woman he had once believed too quiet to change the world. Regret did not arrive like thunder. It arrived softly, carried by the realization that the greatest mistake of his life had never been choosing another woman during the ceremony. It had been failing to recognize the extraordinary strength that had quietly stood before him all along. That evening a gentle rain settled over Silver Dawn, leaving the streets glistening beneath rows of warm lanterns. Evelyn Carter walked alone through the quiet gardens surrounding the council hall, grateful for the rare moments of silence after a long day of negotiations. She paused beside a small reflecting pond where autumn leaves drifted lazily across the water, remembering another rainy night many years ago when she had quietly left the Northern Kingdom believing her story had already ended. Soft footsteps approached behind her. She did not need to turn to recognize who had come. Sebastian Hawthorne stopped several feet away, respecting the distance between them. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The only sound came from the gentle rain falling through the branches overhead. Finally, Sebastian broke the silence. "I have replayed that night in my mind more times than I can count," he said quietly. "For years I believed I had simply made a political decision. Now I understand I never stopped long enough to see the person standing before me. Evelyn looked across the calm water instead of toward him. Her expression remained peaceful, untouched by anger or bitterness. "We were both different people then," she answered softly. Sebastian lowered his eyes. "That is true, but being younger does not excuse failing someone who deserved better." The honesty in his voice carried no expectation of forgiveness. It was simply the truth he could no longer avoid. Evelyn slowly turned to face him. The Alpha King standing before her looked very different from the confident ruler who had once extended his hand to another woman beneath the palace chandeliers. His authority remained, but now it was tempered by humility that only difficult lessons could teach. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she asked gently. Sebastian met her eyes without speaking. "It was never that you chose someone else. It was that I left without anyone wondering whether I was all right." Her words settled between them with quiet weight. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly before answering. "I searched for you after I learned you had disappeared, but by then it was already too late. I should have cared long before you vanished." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes, you should have." There was no accusation in her voice, only simple truth. Surprisingly, that honesty hurt far more than anger ever could. A cool breeze carried the scent of rain across the garden as lantern light reflected softly against the pond. Sebastian drew a careful breath. "I am not asking you to return with me. I am not asking you to erase the years between us. I only wanted the chance to tell you that I was wrong." Evelyn studied him for several quiet moments before offering the smallest smile. "Thank you for saying it." He looked at her with quiet hope, but she gently continued before hope could become misunderstanding. "Forgiveness and returning are not always the same journey." Sebastian gave a slow nod. He understood. The woman standing before him had not built Silver Dawn by waiting for someone else to complete her life. She had built it by discovering her own purpose. Nothing could ask her to abandon that. As they walked back toward the council hall beneath the gentle rain, neither of them carried resentment anymore. Yet both understood that healing the past did not mean pretending it had never happened. Some choices changed lives forever, and the greatest act of courage was not asking time to move backward, but accepting responsibility while walking forward. 3 days after the trade agreement was signed, an early winter storm swept across the western mountains with unusual force, closing several high passes and slowing supply caravans traveling between the Northern Kingdom and Silver Dawn. Although the heavy snow created unexpected challenges, Evelyn Carter remained remarkably calm. Before sunrise, she gathered community leaders, merchants, engineers, and farmers inside the council hall, where detailed maps already covered the long oak table. Every person understood their responsibility before the meeting ended. Food reserves were counted, temporary shelters were prepared, bridges were inspected, and extra wagons were assigned to deliver firewood to isolated families before temperatures dropped further. Sebastian Hawthorne quietly observed every decision without interrupting. There were no shouted commands, no panic, and no confusion. The entire settlement moved like a single family because everyone trusted one another. Throughout the day, Sebastian accompanied Evelyn as she personally visited elderly residents living near the river, checked on children staying inside the community school, and thanked volunteers distributing warm meals to travelers delayed by the weather. No task appeared too small for her attention. A young boy accidentally dropped a basket of blankets into fresh snow and immediately apologized with frightened eyes, expecting disappointment. Instead, Evelyn smiled gently, knelt beside him, and helped gather every blanket before reassuring him that mistakes never defined a person's worth. Sebastian watched the exchange in thoughtful silence. Years earlier, he had admired courage displayed on battlefields and wisdom demonstrated inside council chambers. Now he realized leadership could also be measured through patience shown during ordinary moments. By late afternoon, the strongest winds finally began to fade, revealing clear skies above the valley. Reports soon arrived confirming that every family had remained safe and every traveler had found shelter before nightfall. Captain Rowan Ellis looked across the peaceful settlement with quiet admiration. "Most kingdoms celebrate victory after great battles," he said softly to Sebastian. "Silver Dawn celebrates because every child has a warm place to sleep." Sebastian slowly nodded. The words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. That evening he joined Evelyn on a wooden overlook facing the valley, where hundreds of lanterns glowed beneath the first stars of winter. "Your people follow you because they trust you," he said. Evelyn looked toward the lights below before answering. "They do not belong to me. We belong to one another. That is the difference." Sebastian smiled faintly, understanding the lesson hidden inside her words. Power had built his kingdom. Compassion had built hers. Neither erased the value of the other, yet together they revealed a future greater than either could create alone. As the peaceful silence settled between them, messengers from both territories arrived carrying grateful letters from villages whose winter supplies had already reached their destinations through the new partnership. Families who had never met Evelyn would survive the season because of decisions she had quietly made weeks earlier. Families who had never seen Sebastian would benefit because he had chosen cooperation instead of pride. Standing beneath the clear winter sky, they looked across two futures that no longer needed to stand apart. For the first time since they had met again, they were not facing one another as the Alpha King and the Omega who had disappeared years before. They were standing side by side as two leaders who had finally learned that the strongest kingdoms were not built by choosing who stood above others, but by making certain no one was left behind. Spring arrived quietly, and with it came the first official gathering between the Northern Kingdom and Silver Dawn beneath a newly built stone bridge stretching across the river that now connected both lands. What had once marked the boundary between strangers had become a path walked by merchants, teachers, farmers, craftsmen, and families, carrying hope instead of uncertainty. Colorful banners fluttered gently in the morning breeze while children from both territories laughed together, without caring which kingdom they called home. Evelyn Carter stood at the center of the bridge beside the Council of Silver Dawn, watching the celebration unfold with quiet gratitude. Years earlier, she had crossed another road believing she had lost everything that mattered. Today she understood that sometimes the hardest goodbye became the first step toward the life she had been meant to build. Sebastian Hawthorne approached with a small delegation, wearing no ceremonial crown and carrying no symbol of royal authority beyond the quiet respect he had earned through his recent choices. When he reached Evelyn, he paused before speaking, allowing the joyful sounds around them to fill the brief silence. "When I first came here," he said softly, "I believed I was seeking a trade agreement. Instead, I found a lesson that changed the way I will lead my kingdom for the rest of my life." Evelyn smiled gently. "Then the journey was worthwhile for both of us." Sebastian nodded before looking across the bridge, where people from different backgrounds greeted one another like old friends. "Years ago, I thought strength came from making the right choice once. Now I understand it comes from choosing to become better every day afterward." His words carried no request and no hidden expectation. They were simply the truth. After a thoughtful pause, he looked back at Evelyn with calm sincerity. "If one day our paths continue in the same direction, may I have the honor of walking beside you, not because I deserve another chance, but because I hope to earn your trust one step at a time." Evelyn held his gaze before looking toward the sunrise spreading golden light across the river. The future no longer frightened her because it no longer depended upon someone else's decision. "Tomorrow is built by what we choose today," she answered warmly. "Keep choosing wisely, and the road will decide the rest." Sebastian accepted her answer with a grateful smile. There was no disappointment because he finally understood that love could never be demanded, rushed, or reclaimed simply because regret existed. It could only grow where respect, patience, and shared purpose were allowed to flourish. Together they stepped forward to welcome the first caravan crossing the bridge, applauding as families, merchants, and children traveled freely between the two thriving lands. No one noticed where one kingdom truly ended and the other began because kindness had quietly erased the borders fear had once created. As evening settled across the valley, thousands of lanterns reflected upon the calm river like scattered stars, illuminating the bridge that had become a symbol of reconciliation rather than division. People would remember Evelyn Carter as the Omega who disappeared without a word, but history would remember something far greater. She became the woman who proved that losing one dream did not mean losing a future, and Sebastian Hawthorne became the Alpha King, who learned that true greatness was never measured by the power to choose another person, but by the humility to recognize their worth before it was too late. And from that day forward, both kingdoms flourished because they were finally built upon the strongest foundation of all, compassion that never asked where someone came from before offering them a place to belong.